as well. I'm Samuel.
Samuel, okay.
Yep.
Do election. That's a hot issue.
Okay.
Healthcare, climate, race. Okay, so election.
All right.
It
So-
almost falls in line with my thinking about flat Earth. But of course, there's a lot more motives behind
Right.
stealing an election, flipping an election, creating confusion and chaos around it.
So what's your belief about the election?
I don't believe it was stolen. I mean, I don't. That's not my.
So would it be fair to say you think the election was sort of a standard American election?
Yeah, this one was.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe that this Biden-Harris versus Trump second term was a standard and fair election, and there's been plenty of agencies to come out to validate state by state. There hasn't been one court circuit to find any discrepancies. Otherwise, a few deaths maybe in Florida that were ballots were sent in, but it was literally in less than 10. So there hasn't been enough widespread evidence brought to the consciousness of the public eye to make us feel like, oh, there was something very illegal or nefarious taking place.
So, and how, if you were to put your certainty of that on a scale of like 1 to 100, where would you say you are? And 100 being like total certainty that you're correct, and 0 being none.
I'd be at 100.
100
on that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is there? Do you think, is it possible that does that 100% imply that there's no possibility that you're wrong?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would stand definitely 100% behind that viewpoint of election being like 100% legit.
If it turned out you were wrong, would you want to know?
In this particular election,
Yeah.
no.
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 Okay.
And here's why. And there's a good reason for it.
Okay.
Because in other circumstances, I would be like, yeah. But because of the amount of confusion, and I don't believe that God is the author of confusion, right? And I believe that there's a very real, nefarious, invisible hand confusing issues. And I do believe that that is one of the hidden ingredients inside of this particular season of elections that we're in. That there are powers at play that benefit and capitalize on the chaos and confusion. And so it makes me immediately go, well, why would there be so much of a threat towards the basic good and the greater good of so many people, right? And I am definitely talking about Trump and Trump supporters, who, when we scream for our lives, when we try to do what Jesus' last commandment was to love, I don't hear love coming from the other side. Now, I'm not saying that the liberals, because a lot of us who have voted for Biden and Harris we voted for them on the lesser of two evils ticket. We don't find their policy making and their value system to be necessarily one that serves the greater good, but it to the extent in which we would love to see. But it definitely is not coming from that camp, because never in modern history, the last 4 or 5 presidents have the Ku Klux Klan, Aryan Nation, people who are devout Nazis who are throwing the Sieg Heil salute come out in such support of a candidate.
You know that Richard Spencer, the guy who threw the Sieg Heil salute, came out and endorsed Biden.
That doesn't surprise me. Him and what's that one guy's name? Maya Lupinopoulos, something like that.
Yeah.
And I feel like because there's nuance there, right, obviously. And for one, I think people like Richard Spencer and that Maya Lupinopoulos person, I don't know how to say his name.
It's a tough one.
But they have these really personal interests, and they have this like carved out sect of society that supports them. And here's the other confusing thing. 20% of Bernie Sanders supporters voted for Trump.
Right.
And so there's always exceptions to these rules.
Right.
I would find that if you were to interview Richard Spencer and listen to what his reasoning was, because so did Ann Coulter. She came out and finally turned on Trump too.
Right.
And I feel it's because, at the top, when Trump starts jumping back and forth on his policies, pandering to political votes and numbers and things, those diehard extremists, fuck it, whatever disrupts the system and gaslights the populace but keeps my following with me, let's go this way,
Right. So let me get back to the election being like free and fair, to use like the common parlance. So when you say that you think that the election was just like every other election, do you mean that? Do you see that, or do you think that all the elections that we've been through have been kind of legitimate, or are there degrees of corruption in each of those elections? And you mean that this one was similar to that?
Yeah, like in a macrocosm, I definitely feel like since the inception of, the United States of America, Bill of Rights, Constitution, Declaration of Independence, like since that inception, I definitely feel like it's all rooted in an injustice, right? Stolen land, stolen labor. But that's the macro. Now, if we
I just mean in terms of like the rules of the election.
Right. So so that macro, when I take that back, of course that's there. But then when you start going like the varying degrees, I definitely feel that dishonesty, and ill-gotten intentions and means come into play, like in the way in which people go about getting votes. There's definitely voter suppression happening. There's definitely, I would say, outside forces. It's confusing to me that the party of Reagan would not be more hard and critical of Putin and Russian influences. These guys are still in our current history books as being a part of the axis of evil, which is a threat to our democracy. It doesn't take too much social awareness to see how warm the GOP and Trump and even Mitch McConnell have been so warm in their dealings with somebody like Putin, and so that those send off my alarms. I see red flags there. Now, the thing I don't agree with like our current presidency, already within 100 days, we're already bombing again. We're already at war, right? And there's already a bunch of other policies in our communities. We know that Obama was the great migrator, but there was also a decency. There wasn't this stigmatizing sense in it, because we all agree that there should be immigration policy, but we also agree that there should be human dignity. We should treat people differently. Even our holy books say to love thy neighbor and not call them rapists and killers and thugs and stigmatize them, making it very hard to live in these spaces here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I have my first vaccine, so
oh yeah,
touch your stuff here.
That's cool. No worries. Let's see. So in the sense that, hey, would you mind holding that for just a second? Thank you. In the sense that, like the of like corruption in the election.
Yeah.
A lot of people. Thank you.
Yeah.
So there's definitely like a large group of people who are saying like the election was rigged, and what they mean by that is that that after the election, like the voting machines were rigged, or people were pulling out votes from under the table and whatnot. And then there's also, I think, a group of people who are less on the post-election rigging and more say that the rigging happened before the election, in that they changed voting rules, they did massive mail-in voting, the media was in the bag for Biden. And do you make a distinction in those?
Absolutely. I think that this is the one thing I definitely, because I consume a lot of news, and I'm not partial to my own biases, you know what I mean? Like I'm a journalist, so I really want to get to, the root of these issues. I want to know the truth. And so one of the biggest tip-offs for me that made me go, okay, this is definitely confusion going on, because a lot of Republican lawmakers in Georgia came out, who were in charge of the voting machines, saying 100% unequivocally, not only did I vote for Trump, he lost by huge margins. And I don't understand what the motive would be for somebody like that. Now, could there be lobbyists in their pocket? Could there be corporations in their pocket? Yeah, I guess, but it doesn't make sense to me to totally destroy your relationship with your own party. I think that Trump is a wicked man, and not by any, like, it's not even to diss him or make a derogatory statement. I think that there's actual wickedness existing in him.
What does that mean?
Well, he has, I feel like, a sociopathic disorder where it's not about the people. When there's natural disasters, when there's problems going on in communities of color, he's not coming out making statements to uplift those hearts, to love the neighbors. He's really about himself and his profits and what Trump is doing and the family is doing. To me, when the world is so ill, that sticks out as something wicked. There's a quote that I love. It says, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And I feel that he creates a land of sickness. There's a lot of discord in this country, and he fans the flames of those anxieties, of those separations, those divisions, and causes a level of confusion that creates for a very ill scene, you know? So
you said earlier that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I thought I heard you say was that if this election were, somehow stolen or rigged or what have you, that you wouldn't want to know that.
No. Not that I wouldn't want to know. I would want to know, but in this particular circumstance, I would be okay with it. I would be okay with it because of the way in which.
Do you feel like that's in alignment with your statement recently about being a truth seeker?
Yeah. Because I would want to know the truth, and I can accept the truth that all things are fair in love and war. And I definitely, I'm a United States Marine, and I can see what kind of tactics are being used. Lies are weapons. Deceptions are weapons. The first casualty in any war is truth. And I can see that happening. Oh, hold on. My phone is picking up feedback or something.
No worries.
But I can see the level of deception. So what I want to know, I'd be intrigued. But here's what I want to know is like, well, okay, Trump's willing to do that. His supporters wouldn't give a damn, right? They would be more empowered, more emboldened, which they are, so much so to want to take over the Capitol, right? And really feel miserably at it. Now, you would think that through centuries of oppression, that black and indigenous and brown people would have done that. They would be the ones who want to have an insurrection, take over the Capitol. But not in one Black Lives Matter protest. And I've been to ones ranging from Scottsdale and all throughout this area. I was even in the New York Times this summer, standing with Black Lives Matter. Not one time that I hear anybody say, kill the police. Not once did I say, I don't say fuck the police. My first mentor and chief of police were my first mentors were officers. And not one officer was ever killed at our protest. There's been like 3 or 4 cops killed either by these so-called patriots and Proud Boys, and then officers dying by suicide as a result of what happened at the Capitol, of these people who so-called back the blue and love the values of this country. Now,
I know that there was at least one officer killed during the BLM event, and that there's something like 900 cops injured during the summer of protests.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. And me personally, I'm definitely not for any violence or anybody being killed, But when I'm pointing at the non-alignment and hypocrisy, or the lie of this so-called let's back the blue and then attack these police officers, even if it's in their mind for the name and sake of democracy, and it's for the,
right.
You know what I mean? It's like, for the founding of this country. Well, that to me is there's a lot of confusion taking place. My uncle taught me something that gave me hope, though.
Yeah.
It has slowed my heart down to be able to have these conversations.
Okay.
Because that idea that God's not the author of confusion, for me, it feels like there's another force at hand. And my uncle once said, he's like, you see how easily it seems like these Trump supporters have been fooled into believing and getting behind a con man. I was like, yeah, man. He's like, well, they can easily be fooled back, you know. And it back doesn't mean slanting their views to be on the left, you know. It's not about changing some of these values, because I have a lot of black friends who we bump heads because they're very much evangelical Christians who don't agree with such issues as homosexuality and abortion.
Right.
And I'm like, damn, I mentor a lot of homosexual kids, you know what I mean? And I can't imagine somebody taking their rights away but because of their religious views. But I get it, you know what I mean? I get it. In your mind, you're voting in a way that you want to honor the Lord, and that is like what is dictating the destiny of your soul. So
Right.
the hell be damned with this planet and the physical laws and rules of it. I get that you honor your God, but also look at the last commandment, to love. And if you believe in the values of the country, that there should be equality and justice for all. I told my black friend, I was like, well, what if you had a friend who said that they wouldn't vote for black people to have equal rights, the way you wouldn't vote for gay people to have equal rights? Would you want to be friends with that person who's wanting to oppress you and take away your equal rights to vote? Well, nah. I was like, well, you see my dilemma? Like, I have kids I've been mentoring in juvenile justice systems for over a decade who, you know, who love other women or love other boys or want to identify as gender nonconformative, or, you know, and my instruction is to love. You know, to love as indiscriminately as the sun shines. Doesn't mean to agree as indiscriminately as the sun shines. Doesn't mean to build dangerous bridges over moral middle grounds. You know, there are certain things we can't have moral middle grounds on. I couldn't sit there and listen to a rapist per se and say, okay, well, you make some valid points. I wouldn't find that. You know, I wouldn't find that to be a productive conversation. You know, so.
So you talk about there being, you know, some other hand at work in the creation of chaos.
Yeah.
And I think you identify, you know, Trump as being, you know, kind of at the, you know, part of that chaos, right?
Right.
How do you reconcile that, like, maybe half, just to say, for, you know, half the people in this country feel the way you do about Trump and him being an agent of chaos,
right,
and then the other half saying that, you know, the Democrats and Biden are you know, from the devil and you know, agents of chaos. Like, how, as an outsider, how, like, if someone were just observing that phenomenon happening around the country, how would you know which one was accurate?
No, that's a great question. You know, and when I look at you know, the Democrats and the value system, I would start to say, okay, well then obviously evil versus good, these concepts are philosophically at odds with one another. But when you look at some of these value systems, you go, okay, these are relative concepts, right? Because if I were raised in a predominantly Christian home where the values were, you know, heterosexual, love thy country, military, and I would start to look at anybody that imposed or intruded upon these values as not so good. And over time, if I listened to enough of the right or wrong news outlets, it would reinforce this viewpoint. And so both sides have this going on.
Right.
Whereas, like, let's say predominantly we're in a liberal, right, and most people are, you know, here that I've been experiencing are all about, you know, rights, you know, people having space to be themselves, and identity is huge, and it needs to be protected, right? And so it's a polar opposite, and that's where I was raised. You know, like I've met my first mentor, you know, conservative, didn't even know who Bob Marley was. You know what I mean? Like, but I love this man. We've traveled the country together, speaking to at-risk youth. So there's no innate hate in either side that would definitely categorize him as evil innately. I think we are inherently good and divine, but we learn things. You know, we learn a lot of junk, man, and we learn a lot of junk that creates that wedge that burns those bridges and has us in this this new civil war that just has not been titled, right? It's just like a civil war of ideas, and we're being conditioned, because people do profit off of this chaos and, you know, division and polarization. We're being conditioned to, like, look at that side like, okay, you're evil, you're an enemy. Oh, you
Right.
would have been down with Hitler. You would be a Nazi. You would be there on the extreme ends. There is that going on the right. On the extreme ends on the left, it does get, excuse my language, it's hella annoying being around people who are always correcting your speech,
Right.
correcting what you're saying. So, do you believe in the rights and having First Amendment? Well, then cancel culture might be going way too fucking far, But on the other end, over here, all the way to the right, well, the reason why we need to uphold our identity, because inside these identities, there are statistics that are proving that the disparities are creating slow motion genocide on groups, right? And we let's say I'm on the left, we don't want that side to suffer. I don't want to see any average American, I don't care if they're white, conservative, Christian, I don't want to see them suffer in their family or their prosperity. I don't want them to go back to Europe or leave the country, I just don't want them to want that for all the other people that are sharing this land as well. I think that we have potential in America to become the ideals of our forefathers. Not that they were perfect at either.
Right.
They were victims of their time and their pens and what they wrote about. But we can evolve into these visions. We can evolve into being an actual melting pot that's not one that's built on moral middle grounds or warm fuzzies when we still have resentments and stuff we're not talking about.
Right. So if you have time, I'd like to ask two more questions.
Sure.
So you talk about the slow genocide.
Yeah.
I wonder what would you identify as like the single structure or entity that is perpetuating that in the worst way, with regard, let's say, to the Black community.
Okay. And there are 5 gateways, but they all are basically all on the same one arm, right? So housing, healthcare, education, employment, and of course justice. And when you examine these 5 gateways into human health and safety and prosperity in our country, if you examine the statistics, you'll see that the darker the shade of skin you go, the higher the rate of genocide. Now, just in 3 communities that I personally observed, I'll say gentrification, right? Because housing, right, investing in housing is number one pathway to prosperity in America. Right? This is proven.
Okay.
Housing is the one way we can prosper, save, protect our families, and
To
grow.
have family wealth.
Yeah, family wealth. You can
Right.
pass it down.
Right.
So gentrification would be the number one. So, and I've observed this on a personal level in 4 places. In Veracruz, Mexico, Phoenix, Arizona, Pasco, Washington. Statistically, over the last 3 decades, these communities have depleted by at least 40% in Black population ownership of homes. And if you don't have a home, you don't have any earth beneath you.
Right.
You can't get a job. You can't get education. You're not going to really have access to health care. When the George Floyd murder happened, that was the biggest thing that I witnessed firsthand. It exposed and exploited our lack of health care structure, mental health care specifically. Mental health care becomes drinking more, smoking more, eating more, lack of exercise. We become self-oppressive. We do the job of a racist, inherently racist system, and so that's one way as I see gentrification as.
Where would you place like Planned Parenthood in the scale of genocide in this country against Black people?
That's one of the great questions. That's a really great question because of the history of Planned Parenthood.
Well, you have the founder who's the eugenicist and then a legitimate like white supremacist.
Absolutely.
And it's currently it's an issue that's a non-starter for the left. Like it's a democratic institution that they argue for vehemently, but since Roe versus Wade, it's caused the death of over 20 million Black babies.
It's a very valid point, and I agree with you because one of the things I realized that why it's a non-starter conversation for most on the left, and because it's the dichotomous thinking. It's like all or nothing. It's like black or white thinking. No pun intended to our
No.
conversation. but it's like this black or white thinking. It's like, oh, you're not for abortion? Well, okay, you must support Trump. Like,
Right.
you easily just let's fuck everything and run.
Right,
Let's put you
yeah.
over here. But one of the reasons why is people don't take time to have conversations. We're in a clickbait headline
Right.
society. People don't dive in. People are incredibly afraid of conversations.
But like, how would something like Planned Parenthood compare to
Yeah.
gentrification in like?
Yeah. Okay. So let's take like Planned Parenthood for instance. Like what you just said right there. I know that to be true. The origins being in the eugenicist, white supremacy, and it's tactical because the positioning of these Planned Parenthoods in their physical location and who they market to.
That's right.
Now, one of the things I do see is that I understand how that does lead to genocide. And I mean, it's funded. It's like freaking nonprofit funded genocide happening before our eyes. But because of it only being a
Taxpayer
sliver,
funded.
yeah, and it's not a part of a bigger issue. Because I know on the left, one of the biggest issues is like, okay, you want that black or brown baby to not be killed in the womb, but every policy thereafter, it kills us. Like I grew up in poverty, man. Like my mom was a drug addict. Mental health issues and human trafficking was what moved us. You know what I mean? And there's like when we needed food stamps, we were often in government cheese lines for powder milk and government cheese, and there are a lot of programs that don't look after the child once they're born. Often, of course, we go to public schools, but mental health, I go and talk to tons of students. I'm a public speaker, and I'm always talking to students, mostly at-risk youth. One of the things we don't have is therapy. This one kid told me he's in juvie. He's looking at 20 years for murder, right? And he said, rich kids go to counseling, poor kids go to juvie. And I totally agree. I've been watching it for 12 years now. Now, it's one of those nuanced things, Planned Parenthood, where it's like you can't just take that one issue and make a whole well-rounded, thought-out argument. You have to look at the bigger picture, how it fits into all these things, because there really is no like hard opinion on it if you look at it. Like if somebody really knew the origin and they knew the inception of Planned Parenthood and all the programs after, both the Democrat, Republican, and a moderate in the room, and they would look at all the truth, all the pieces of truth, they couldn't make a hard yes or a hard no. You would have to address it communally. You would have to be like, I actually love you, neighbor, and I don't understand everything, but let's build this bridge together. Let's see if we can arrive at a place of real truth and understanding and dignity and respect, and have a bridge that walks back and forth.
Right.
And
so what I hear, like one of the keys to that answer is like the ability to say I don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
It's like how important. Like that's pretty. I think that's an important realization I think that people should have about most subjects, right?
Yeah.
Is that leaving that room for doubt.
Absolutely.
All right, and then one final question I like to ask everybody is
credit card, you can ask for a credit card?
No. Yeah.
Exit to the gift shop, man.
Like, no. Like where do you get what's your primary news source?
My primary news source, I have several of them.
Sure.
Okay, so at the end of the day, when I'm resting and ready to watch, I'll start with both CNN and Fox News. Okay, I watch them both, right? Because they're extremes, right? And then from there, I'll glaze over New York Times, BBC. I'll look at Al Jazeera and USA Today, and I was recently reading The Hill and then the Chinese Morning Post. So I'll look at all these different global, national, some foreign headlines. To get a broad perspective,
and what percentage of the time would you say that you
some NPR?
Sure. Yeah. That you fact check yourself by going to primary sources when you see information in these outlets?
So one of the things I do, I wouldn't say I spend a lot of like upfront time like researching and everything unless I'm personally writing an article on a subject. So like recently I wrote an article for and I had 10 different journalists, editors who are award-winning journalists who will not only copy, edit, they'll fact check and like call bullshit on certain areas of logic or bias or something,
Okay.
challenge me so that because that's the thing. 62% of Americans are afraid to speak publicly because
Yes.
the cancel culture
Right.
on both sides. Fucking, we're on the left or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We're afraid of fucking up and saying the wrong thing because we know how vicious the damn community has gotten.
Yeah.
It has its own air of oppression. Where it's
Right.
like you can't speak. And if
It
you
seems
can't
like
speak,
an ever-shifting ground too, where it's
Yeah.
like last week this word was okay, but now it's not okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and then like the Dr. Seuss phenomenon
Right.
now going on.
Yeah.
And me and my son, we just filmed a 6-part series of Dr. Seuss little videos for preschool kids.
Oh, wow.
Teaching them poetry and storytelling.
Right.
Well, there's nuance to examine there. Dr. Seuss isn't canceled in my work or life, but the insensitivities of how things were acceptable at one point, they have changed. I used to refer to women as bitches when I was listening to Tupac in high school and everything. And one of my white feminist friends, she's like, very casual, how come you refer to women as bitches?
Right.
And in my intention, I was like, Tupac. That's just part of the culture.
Right.
But the impact that it's having was very sexist and misogynistic and
Right.
disenfranchising. So I adjusted. That's why I can look at Dr. Seuss like, it ain't canceled, but when you got Fox and CNN going on and on about it, right, you have these extremes. Of course you're going to get people lost in those distinctions. They're
Right.
not going to talk about the issues. They're going to get clickbait headline because tomorrow we're going to have a barge stuck in some canal, and that's going to be the trending fucking thing,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So yeah.
Appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it.